Hello there. In this video, I'd like to show you how easy it is to drive the Unity standard assets cross-platform input using the Touch Controls library. Now, to get the Unity standard assets into your project, the easiest way is going to Package Manager and looking for the standard assets and importing it. And while that's importing, I'd like to point out that once that's finished, we'll probably end up getting an error. And that error is relating to the deprecated API that the standard assets library is using, and which is no longer available in the newer versions of Unity. But never fear, because once this is done, we'll see that here's our error as predicted, and it is relating to, if we jump over to Visual Studio, the fact that some files are using deprecated UI elements and it's not importing the unityengine.ui namespace. But let's go back to Unity, and I've included a rewrite method up here, and by clicking on that we'll end up getting rid of those errors. Unity will then recompile the files and this error should go away. And there we go. Now we can get on to the actual part of driving the cross-platform input. So let's take a look at a sample scene. One of the most popular sample scenes would be the third person, character third person here. Let's load that up and take a look at the scene. We'll notice that once the scene loads, we do have another error down here, which is relating to a GUI layer which is on the camera. But Unity tells us that it is going to take care of that when we next save. So we don't actually have to do anything about that. So for the time being, it is safe to leave that one alone. We'll notice that the scene is loaded, and we've got a UI component on the game screen here. They relate to a touchpad on the left and a touchpad on the right, and a big ugly jump button. So we're going to try and fix this up a little bit. Now, a convenient place to get this to store all the components that we need, I may as well put them on the helpers object here. So let's start by adding the Touch Controls Manager, which we need for the Touch Controls library. And for the most part, we don't need to worry about any of these settings. And that's in general. This thing will generally run itself. The other component that we will need is the lightweight UI input module, which I'm using instead of Unity's standard input module controller, which is generally over here. We can notice also, while I'm over here, that there's a touch input module, which is blatantly deprecated, and a standalone input module, which is geared towards the old input system, and it's asking to replace it with a new input module. But we're not going to worry about that because the driver will end up cleaning these up for us. So let's keep going. We have these two components of ours. The next one we're going to want to drive this input is a joypad controller. Now this joypad controller has a main setting here, and that relates to what parts of the screen the controller will listen to. And as you can see, the first option here is a full screen. That's not quite what we want for this particular game here. We want a left-hand side and a right-hand side to be controlling different aspects of our game. So the next option down is a left-hand side, still no good. The right-hand side, same thing, still no good. But then we've got the left and the right-hand side here. And that's going to give us 2 virtual joypads here. And that's exactly the one we want. Now, for the last component that we need, we are going to need the cross-platform input driver. Now, this component is asking us how many controllers we have. And we just have the one controller. We have the one joypad controller here. Even though there's 2 virtual joypads, the left and the right, it's still just the one controller. So we can grab this controller and pop that down in here into the object field. And we do have 2 mappings for this. So let's start with the left-hand side mapping, which is what we're going to use to control our character, move our character around. And that, by default, in the cross-platform input, has been using the named axes, horizontal and vertical. And you might remember those or recognize those from the old input system. Now the input type here, there's 2 different types here. We've got the pointer direction and a pointer movement. A pointer direction refers to your standard joystick configuration where you have a center point and the pointer is in a direction relative to that center point. Just like a standard joystick will move around the central point. And for the left-hand side, that's exactly what we want. For the right-hand side, we're going to be using the mouse X and the mouse Y axes. And that doesn't mean we're going to be using the mouse, it's just the standard cross-platform input has decided to use the mouse X and the mouse Y as the named axes. And that, again, relates to the old input system. And in this particular case, we're going to use a pointer movement. Just like a mouse doesn't move around a central point, a mouse moves in a direction. It's almost like a delta movement. And that's exactly what we're going to use over here. Now the sensitivity for that, in general, is going to be 1. But I'm going to skip and save us a little bit of time here because I've played around with this before. And I found out that in fact 5 gives us a better experience looking around the scene. So we're going to use that one there. Now, we're going to take a look around over here. And we don't need this touch control prefab anymore. It pretty much relates to all this UI you see on the screen over here. And that's not what we want. So we can actually start by just flat out deleting that. But we may as well keep that object as a nice container, whereby we will add our own buttons. And the first button that we're going to add here is a jump button to replace the one that we got rid of. So let's first of all name it correctly, give it the correct text, make it white, it's a personal preference. And I'm not a fan of this rounded off square, or this rounded off rectangle, so let's go find something a little bit neater in my opinion. And again, just my opinion, but we'll work with that. Now we can see that in the scene view, I'm going to try and make this the same size. We're going to increase the size of this text. We can eyeball it, about 47. 47 looks good. When we added this button, it created a new canvas for us. Now, in general, and by default, the canvas should really be scaled with screen size, because we don't know, on a mobile phone, we don't know the exact screen size. They're generally HD, full HD in size, So let's pick those as the reference resolution. 1920 by 1080. Done. Now I'm going to want to put this jump button back in the bottom right hand corner. That's a standard position for our buttons. Now let's fudge this a bit and let's try and place this in a position that looks about right for where we want it to be. Let's go a little bit further over here. Great. I think that looks about good. Now to drive the input system on our UI, we're going to want to add the Unity component event trigger. And that's going to send events through based on how we're interacting with this UI. The first event we're going to want to listen for is the pointer down. And the second event we're going to want to listen to is, you could probably guess, the pointer up. Now we're going to be listening and we're going to be sending through these events to our driver component, which, if you remember, is sitting over here on the helpers object. So let's go back to our button and our event trigger. I'm going to add one action here and another action here. I'm going to drag this object here and here. We're going to take a look at the cross-platform input driver. And on the first one, we're going to say set button down. And because this is our jump button, and the cross-platform is listening to the jump button, we're going to put that as the text string for the button here. And likewise, we're going to do the same thing for the set button up. And there we go. So this UI button now is listening to the pointer down and pointer up events. Now that looks good. So let's duplicate this button. I'm going to add something here which the standard cross-platform input, the prefab here, didn't have. And that was actually a crouch feature. I guess they just ran out of screen space, or they thought that touch controls weren't really a big thing and weren't really necessary. Well, we're going to fix that. So let's modify the text to be appropriate. And now we're going to modify the position of this button. And I think that looks about good. Now, if I've done everything correctly, we've set up the listeners, we've set up the control manager, the input manager, the joypad controller, and the driver for the cross-platform input. We've also set up two buttons to drive, to send events to the driver as well. With that all in place, we should be able to start up our game, and on my touch computer here, touchscreen computer, I should be able to move our character with the left-hand side of the screen and look around with the right-hand side of the screen. So let's give that a go. Well, there's moving, success there. And on the right-hand side of the screen, we are looking around. There is the jump button and the crouch button. And we put it all together. We can look around, we can move around, we can jump up, and there we go. There's one problem there. You may have noticed that he's not crouching. And as with these off-the-cuff videos, I can point out exactly why, and that was because I forgot to actually say that the crouch is not sending through a jump string, but we have a third-person controller here, which is using the C string. C would obviously stand for crouch, and that's the button, and that's the name that we should be listening to. As you can see, this whole line was actually modified by the Touch Controls code writer that we ran right at the very beginning of the video. So let's modify this for the crouch button. So we have sending through C, and let's run that again. There we go. Jump, crouch, moving around, and looking around. And there we have it. I hope this video has demonstrated how easy it is to drive the cross-platform input and other third-party libraries using the Touch Controls library.